David Knight for Infowars.com. What you're looking at here is a statue in memory of Major Joseph Winston. He was the leader of the North Carolina troops, the militia. They were the part of the Continental Army that did not flee. They held their grounds and they fought the Hessians as well as Tarleton's cavalry. And of course, the Hessians were the German mercenary soldiers. Tarleton, you'll remember from Mel Gibson's movie The Patriot. Not exactly historically accurate the way they portrayed Tarleton. I don't believe he ever pinned people in a church and burned it to the ground, but he was not a great guy nevertheless. But of course, this was the leader of the militia, the North Carolina troops who stood their grounds like Stonewall Jackson would later do in the Civil War. Now, the reason we're here is to talk about a Pyrrhic victory. And take a look at this beautiful park here. It's a very large park in Guilford County. This is the Battle of Guilford County Courthouse here. And you see this tree-lined road that's behind me. It's a beautiful park commemorating a Pyrrhic victory. What is a Pyrrhic victory? Well, the original Pyrrhic victory was by the Greek general Pyrrhus, who fought the Roman troops. He won the battle, but he lost so many troops, he said another victory against the Romans will ruin this army. And that's essentially what happened to the British here at the Guilford County Courthouse battle. The troops were led on the American side by Nathaniel Greene, on the British side by Cornwallis. And although Cornwallis got the victory, he had so many casualties that he had to leave the area and head toward Virginia to try to link up with Benedict Arnold. Nathaniel Greene, on the other hand, went south, where Cornwallis had had so many victories. He went into South Carolina, into Georgia, and he undid the victories that had taken place down there by Cornwallis. Meanwhile, Cornwallis was trapped at Yorktown, and that was the end of the Revolutionary War. So here we are at the site of a Pyrrhic battle, a turning point in the Revolutionary War. And why are we here? It's because of the current events today that we saw in the election. We see the article that was on the Drudge Report, I believe it was on the Washington Post, where they were talking about Louisiana, a state that was won by Donald Trump, and he got the majority of the delegates, but now, through maneuvering and backdoor means, Ted Cruz has now gotten the majority of the delegates in Louisiana. Now, those delegates will still be bound to Donald Trump on the first round of votes, but if he doesn't get the magical majority of 50% plus one vote, that 1,237 number, then on the second round, those delegates will put Ted Cruz in. And I have to say, it will be the ultimate Pyrrhic victory for Ted Cruz, for the GOP establishment that he represents. And I believe he has always represented. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But understand that what he's talking about, what Ted Cruz and the Republican establishment are talking about, is stealing the election not from Donald Trump, but from the American voters. Millions of people's votes will be thrown away by the loyally Machiavellian actions of people like Ted Cruz and the GOP establishment, like Jeb Bush and Karl Rove. They are conspiring to throw your votes in the trash, just the same as if they came into the precinct and ripped up your ballot boxes. And if that doesn't create a revolution, nothing will. That's why I say it'll be a Pyrrhic victory. There's absolutely no way that Ted Cruz can win. He needed in the mid 80%, in the low 80% before this last election on Tuesday. Now he needs 85% of the remaining votes, but he needed in the low 80s of all the delegates in Tuesday's election. All he got was 40% of the delegates. So every week he's getting farther and farther behind. Donald Trump, on the other hand, needed in about 55% is what he needs now. He needed maybe about 56, 57% before. He got 60% of the delegates. So each week we've seen Donald Trump get or exceed what he needs to get to that 1,237 number. We hope that that is what happens. Meanwhile, Ted Cruz and the GOP establishment is falling further behind each week, and their only hope of victory is to steal it from the American voters. Today we have the news about that came out of the National Enquirer, and a lot of people dismiss it, saying it's the National Enquirer. To me, this kind of news has even more credibility. Of course, we have seen politicians like Gary Hart, like John Edwards from here in North Carolina, who was living in a post-Bill Clinton world, and yet his illicit affair destroyed him. In the Democrat Party, with Ted Cruz and his wife, we have people who have said, as Heidi Cruz said, we, Ted and I, are the face of God to the American people. Our campaign is. Really? I think you are the face of hypocrisy to the American people. I'm not judging what he does in his life. I mean, certainly I don't know what he's done, even relative to Donald Trump. But we don't have a floating standard here. We don't grade on a curve. But regardless, it's a different thing when you pretend to be something that you're not. And Ted Cruz now appears to have gone full on Elmer Gantry with these allegations of 5 affairs that are there. And again, remember the track record of the National Enquirer. They took down Gary Hart. They took down John Edwards. They took down Jesse Jackson and his love child relationship that was there. Tiger Woods was destroyed by this. And of course, they had also revealed an affair with Bob Dole. They have a very accurate track record when it comes to this kind of reporting. They are very careful. They know what the libel laws are. They released this information just days after Gawker essentially destroyed by a judgment, $150 million plus judgment about this Hulk Hogan case. They're not going to put this stuff out if they don't have the evidence. The only hope that Ted Cruz has is that the mainstream media is not going to report it. We're going to report it. Social media is going to report it. He's done. And I want to add one other thing that I think is very interesting in terms of the Machiavellian maneuvers of Ted Cruz and the GOP establishment. I believe this hasn't just started in the last couple of months, in the last couple of weeks, as they've seen him as their only hope and they're caught between a rock and a hard place is the way they want to put it. No, I believe this has been going on for a long time. Back in June, I believe it was before, I haven't looked up the date, I should have looked to see when Donald Trump entered the race. I believe it was even before Donald Trump entered the race. Ted Cruz was a major factor in the race. He already had multiple super PACs that had been funded to the tune of millions of dollars. One of those super PACs in June spent $536,000. 500 of the $536,000, $500,000, $500,000 was given to a Carly Fiorina. The Carly Fiorina, it was either her campaign or the super PAC. I forget which one it was. And everybody was talking about this at the end of September when they filed their quarterly reports. The FEC said, we want a letter of explanation. Why would a super PAC supporting Ted Cruz give $500,000 to Carly Fiorina, his competitor? Good question. Was it hush money? Was it part of building up her campaign? Because this is an orchestrated front with multiple heads set up to take down any possible outside infiltration, whether it was going to be Rand Paul or whether it was going to be some other unforeseen candidate, or perhaps they'd already had Donald Trump in their sights. Nevertheless, I believe this is another indication that the establishment had many hidden heads that they were pulling together, that these people were colluding together even before this happened. We'll see what happens. We've not heard any more, even though this is a major story that was covered by all the mainstream media, the Washington Post, New York Times, CBS News. Everyone was covering this strange $500,000 transfer from a Ted Cruz super PAC to Carly Fiorina. Nobody has followed through after 6 months as to what the FEC has done. So it's not clear whether that's been resolved or not. Nevertheless, that plus the eligibility issues, plus now this character issue for somebody who has put himself out as the glitterbug preacher, the face of God to America. What Ted and Heidi Cruz are looking like right now are the Jim and Tammy Faye Baker of the GOP, another pair from North Carolina. And reporting from North Carolina, I'm David Knight for Infowars.com.